will say good day to you this day of your time. How are you all? All right. First of all, once again, thank you for the co-creation of the interaction and the allowance of the transmission to occur in this way and on this day. Each and every time you allow us to experience each and every one of you, by interacting with us, we get to experience more and more of the facets of the multidimensional crystal of creation, and this to us is a gift. So we thank you for your gift and willingness to share. We will begin this transmission with what we have titled it, Angels and Demons. Ooh, scary. But not really. Let us proceed in the following way. Now, we understand that you have a great degree of literature, a great degree of stories, great degree of mythology surrounding the idea of angels, demons, what you consider them to be. But there is a completely different perspective that we would like to introduce to you this day of your time. And that perspective begins from the point of view of all that is, what you might call God, Goddess, Creator. Doesn't matter what the title is, but from that point of view, it takes on a completely different quality, completely different idea, and a completely different expression and experience of this concept that you call the angels and the demons. Before we proceed with that particular point of view, however, we would like to point out that while this is not always the case, in much of the literature, what might be your religious texts and so on and so forth that have been handed down to you through history, through the ages, the mentions of so-called angels and so-called demons have more often than not simply been representations of different types of extraterrestrial beings, rather than classically what you might consider to be literally an angelic consciousness or a demonic one. It is simply that in that day and age, in those times, when the people on your planet really didn't have other ways of describing what they were experiencing, they simply lumped into the whole angelic demonic realm or notion the idea of the different kinds of extraterrestrials they may have encountered that were visiting your world and interacting with the people on your planet here and there from time to time. So just understand, and we simply get this idea out of the way up front, that many of the stories that have to do with angels and demons really have to do with beings such as myself and other kinds of extraterrestrial beings that were interacting with your species for many, many millennia. But from the other point of view, from the higher point of view, let us now proceed to point out and to remind you that all that is, by definition, must contain both the positive energies and the negative energies. And the more you expand your consciousness, the more you will actually come into a recognition and awareness of both the positive and the negative. Because if you're expanding to have a higher point of view, you're going to be seeing more closely from the point of view of creation itself, and you're going to be seeing more of the negative as well as the positive. Now, this does not mean that you have to experience what you are observing in a negative sense, but you will become more aware of more of its existence, because as you expand and become more your version of all that is, you cannot shut out, you cannot deny the totality of all that is. But because it is a totality, and as you expand in your awareness of both the positive energies and the negative ones, you will also come to understand that creation is not just a duality or a polarity, but a trinity. For always, always, always in the center will be the balance point. And that balance point between the two polarized views will form the third perspective, the Trinity perspective, that will allow you to allow the positive and the negative to exist in a state of balance so that you can neutrally observe both sides and then actively choose to experience what you prefer to experience without invalidating what you no longer prefer to experience. There's a very, very big difference between forming a value judgment as opposed to simply preferring something as a representation of who and what you are as an energy, as a consciousness, as a frequency, as a vibration. Whatever your natural core being is has a certain frequency, and the things that align with it, the things that you prefer to be, that are really truly you, do not invalidate the things you don't prefer. You leave room, you allow room for all aspects and all reflections of creation to exist, because without one side, the other could not exist. It must be taken as a whole, but again, that doesn't mean you have to experience certain effects that are not in alignment with what you prefer to experience based on who you allow yourself to know you truly are. Nevertheless, let us proceed with the idea of the expression of angels and demons. Now, we have talked about the idea that first and foremost there is what you might call in existence simply the One. Now, the One, which is everything but homogeneous, because it is homogeneous, there is no reflection of the other to compare itself to. Therefore, the One has absolutely no experience of itself, no awareness of itself whatsoever. It just is the isness that is. But there is an aspect of the One that we call the all that is, and that is the aspect of the One that is aware of itself as the One, that is aware of itself as everything within existence. That's how we make that differentiation for the sake of clarity. The One is unaware of itself, but the all that is aware that it is all that is. However, the idea of recognizing that all that is all that is, requires, as we just said, a reflection. In order for something to recognize what it is, there must be the comparison, there must be the reflection of what it is not, so that it can know itself by contrast. Thus, the first reflection, the first recognition, the first level of awareness that all that is has of its own existence as an actual being, as an actual consciousness, as all that is, that first level is what you call angelic, demonic consciousness. That's the first split. That's the first reflection in the mirror of existence itself. Being that all forms of consciousness have autonomy, because everything is made of consciousness and everything in its own way is self-aware, when you start reflecting, every single reflection has self-awareness. Now, it may not be the self-awareness that you experience as physical beings, but nevertheless, it is a type of self-awareness. There has to be that reflectivity. There has to be that awareness of self in some way, shape, or form for there to be an expression of a thing made out of the consciousness of existence itself. So the first level of awareness that all that is has of itself is the idea that it is the balanced state of everything, the balanced state, the Trinity that includes the polarities of positive, negative, and the balance point in the middle. So the perspective of all that is, of itself as all of that, is a balanced one. However, the next stage of that, where comes into play the idea of the angels and demon expression of all that is as consciousness, is that by definition it is a polarized one. So the angels and the demons, as you call them in your language, are actually the first level of self-awareness that all that is has of itself just as the polarity and not as the Trinity. Is this making sense so far? The idea is that it contains the vibration we call mechanically positive, which is not a value judgment. Positive, negative are not value judgments. It's just the idea that something is either integrative, collective, expansive, connective. That's the positive mechanical energy. or negative, segregative, disconnective, contracting as opposed to expanding. This is the negative mechanism. Now, again, the all that is understands the balance point between the two and understands itself to be that balance point between the two, as well as the polarities. But the angels and demons are the idea of the polarity on its first level of pure expression as a duality, as a polarity. Now, in your ancient texts, again, in your mythologies of angels and demons, you have captured the essential idea of this by recognizing in your stories that the so-called demons are, quote-unquote, fallen angels. So you're still recognizing the angelic aspect to them, but you also recognize that they are functioning more from a reflection of negative energy rather than positive energy, which is what you describe and ascribe to the idea of the angelic realm. So really, in essence, what you're really dealing with is that first bubble of all that is both polarities, experiencing itself in a polarized way as the positive reflection that you call angelic, and as the shadow reflection, the negative energy reflection, you call demonic. But these are essentially just terms. The idea really is that you are dealing with the same being, but the polarity of that being. And the way that it represents itself in your stories is as you need to express it to simply relate to it through the idea of something that seems somewhat humanoid. The idea of the true angels and the true demons are really, in a sense, non-physical. They can never really materialize physically in the way that you think of yourselves materializing physically, because they operate on energy levels that are far away above and beyond the concept of the physical material vibration. Nevertheless, they can, in a sense, imprint themselves or present themselves in the same way, or by analogy, that you might imagine you might have a sheet of rubber in front of you, and an angel or a demon can, in a sense, extend its hand, this is a metaphor, into the sheet of rubber so you can see the impression of it that you would consider to be its physical representation, but you're actually not really seeing the actual being, you're just seeing how it imposes itself in the material of your particular reality domain, of your particular dimension, which seems solid to you. So they can be visualized, they can be sensed, but you're never actually seeing the real being itself. You're only seeing a representation as best as they can stretch their hand into the rubber membrane, but they can never actually break through in the same way. The idea, therefore, of interaction between you has to be by agreement. You have to align with the vibration that they give off and create a representation in your reality out of your energy, your consciousness, and your material in order for you to create a projectional representation of having an interaction with that level of consciousness, be it angelic or be it demonic, the shadow side of the angels. This tells you right up front that you are never capable of being really directly influenced by nor controlled by these energies, because you are not actually in direct contact in your physical reality. You have to create an agreement between you to vibrate in accord to the frequency they give off in order to have any experience of interaction with them at all, and thus, when you agree to do so, you create by the same agreement a projection from your own consciousness that materializes something for you so that you can have a physical experience of interacting with something that you actually are having no direct interaction with. Not in that way physically anyway. Energetically, yes, but not directly physically. Now, the idea also of this whole analogy of the demons simply being the shadow side of angels is also represented in your mythologies and in your stories, in your presentations, by the idea of how you name these things and how you order these so-called hierarchies. And in a moment you will see that there is a very direct analogy to the idea you call the yin-yang symbol in this presentation. Just as your yin-yang symbol expresses the idea of polarities by having one dark side and one light side, and yet in the darkness there is always going to be a light circle, and in the light there will always be the dark circle, this lets you know as a symbol that no matter what you vibrate with, there is always the freedom to choose to go through the doorway to the other side. You are never left without freedom to choose. And the yin-yang symbol is a perfect representation of the Trinity in the sense that you have the light and the dark and access points to the dark and the light from each side that can cross over, and the line in between the two is the balance point between them that represents the Trinity. But how this is represented in your mythologies and your stories and your representations of angels and demons, this yin-yang symbol and the ability to access either side from either side, is in how you have structured this idea of these beings in this hierarchical fashion. So you recognize in your story the idea of the king of the demons, what you call Lucifer. And you know in your stories that Lucifer is, as again you say, a fallen angel, but that you know his name means light bearer, bearer of light. Now the idea therefore is that's the representation right there, that even though he represents the mechanical negativity vibration, you still know by allowing that name to remain that he is capable of being a doorway through which you can use negative energy to still find your way to the light if you allow yourself to use that vibration and form the relationship in an appropriate way. And on the other side, you have the idea of what you call the angel Gabriel, which in your stories is supposed to blow the trumpet in the day of judgment, which causes a little bit of fear in a lot of you. And therefore you have the representation on the positive side of the idea of maybe being judged in a negative way. And so you see the yin-yang symbol superimposed even upon the angelic and demonic realm by knowing that no matter how light it is, no matter how dark it is, you always have access. You always have some symbolic vibrational representation that allows you to access the other side and make a choice through your freedom and your power to choose. Is this making sense to you? All right. So, by beginning to recognize this bubble, this reflective sphere of all that is not the one, that is not the all that is, that recognizes itself from a balanced point of view, but is the first bubble, the first energy sphere, the first sphere of consciousness that is actually playing out the duality, then you can see that as the spheres go down and down and down and down into the idea of crystallization into physical reality, that issue, that experience of polarity goes with it and becomes denser, 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 and denser, and denser. So that when you then experience the idea of your consciousness as a projection you call a physical life, a physical incarnation, you're going to be dealing with the densest possible level of the vibration of that polarity and that Trinity. So the idea then is that when you experience that density of polarity, you're going to find yourself coming up against those ideas, those definitions, and those beliefs that are aligned mechanically with positive energy or aligned mechanically with negative energy in very visceral ways, so that you do make it seem as if you are dealing with beings that are so powerful, these angelic and demonic beings, but all you're actually dealing with is a reflection of your own energy on this level, represented to you by those who are the ambassadors of each respective positive or negative energy. That aspect of the angelic realm, the demonic realm, that act as the first ambassadors of polarity. And on your level being so crystallized, so densified, you are dealing with the most dense version of those ideas, and so you experience those things in the most visceral way you possibly can. Does that make sense? And that's why it's so easy for you to buy into great joy and great fear in that way. It almost seems as if there's no real neutrality in your reality. But that is the key. That is the place to be. That is where you come from. That is where you experience your projections in both directions of the positive and the negative, and find yourself having whatever experiences are based on what you believe to be true. Because as has been pointed out many times, belief systems are designed to perpetuate themselves and make it seem that no other belief is possible. So if you're dealing with positive energy, you have very, very powerful experiences of reality and nature and beings and consciousness reflecting to you the solidity, the truth of that idea of the positive side of creation and all that is. But if you're dealing with negative beliefs, you get just as strong an array of presentations of the visceral, solid nature of the so-called beings that are the representations of that negativity. But all you're really dealing with directly are the reflections of the negative beliefs and fear-based beliefs within yourself, or the reflections of the positive beliefs and the joy-based beliefs within yourself. And in knowing that these projections come from you at the center, by bringing those things back in and creating more and more neutrality and more blending, you will achieve more balance with these ideas. You will not fear the negative, and you will allow yourself to not charge that energy so strongly for yourselves, and you will allow yourselves to see that you are free to choose, and you will allow yourselves to experience far more balance in your lives, which will give you a much better opportunity to sense the balance that all that is experiences itself to be, and start aligning more and more with the energy of all that is on that level, so that no matter what happens in your life, no matter how it may have initially been generated, you will always have the opportunity to transmute everything into the vibrational energy that you prefer to, by coming from that place of neutralization, so that all things are balanced, so that the scales are even, and without invalidating what you don't prefer, you gain the ability and the power that you've always had more consciously to choose what you do prefer. Does this make sense to you? All right. So anytime you hear of anyone or looking at any piece of literature that talks about a run-in with an angel or a demon, start coming from a more modern definition of these things. Let go of the old-fashioned, outdated, medieval, fear-based definitions, and start bringing your definitions into a more streamlined format that is more representative and more appropriate for what you have called on your planet the modern age, your 21st century. And allow yourselves to truly understand the mechanism behind these things. For yes, you are dealing with consciousness, but the only consciousness there is to deal with is the consciousness of the creation itself, of existence itself. And yes, all forms and expressions of consciousness, as we said, are autonomous and have their own self-awareness, but that in no way, shape, or form means you are ever controlled by these things if you prefer not to play by those particular rules. It's always in your hands. It's always up to you what you are aligned with, and there is no need to fear any of those things, for they are there for you to illuminate what needs to be illuminated in the way that you prefer. For remember, it's much, much easier to see a candle flame when it's surrounded by darkness. So the darkness serves you to see the light, even as the light creates shadows and puts you in touch with the idea of the darkness. And round, like the yin-yang symbol, you go, creating cycles and cycles and cycles of experience of polarity, and neutralizing, and always coming back to zero, and creating again a new cycle of polarity, and neutralizing, and coming back to zero, and yet again creating another cycle of polarity over and over and over again, because this is the definition of the process by which you discover yourselves from a new point of view, by always expanding into polarity and drawing yourself back into the neutral space to gather the information from the experience you had of the polarity, and then expanding yourself again in a new direction and experiencing polarity from a new point of view and gathering yourself back together again and constantly going through this expansion and contraction. And this is one of the reasons that we have called the upcoming event the idea of 2015 to 2016, the years of expansion and contraction, because this experience of expansion and contraction and dealing with positive and negative energies will accelerate and will amplify and will magnify. And it is to your own advantage to understand that this is a natural cycle, so that going with the flow will allow you to take advantage of this cycle of breathing in and out and reinvent yourself anew every time you go back to the 0 point and expand and allow yourself to go up in frequency and up in frequency and up in frequency, so that you can begin to see going back and forth between these polarities not as this, but as this. Always rising, even while descending, so that you know that you are aligning more and more with your true nature and allowing yourself to experience life in all its forms in the way that is most truly representative of your core vibration. You all have a little angel and a little demon in you. Allow yourselves to come to terms and be at peace with the reflections that you see. For the devils are only there to show you the devil inside, so that you can decide for yourselves if that's what you truly wish to align with. And the angels are there to encourage you to look at all aspects of yourself from a place of power. Neither side denies the existence of the other. Both sides work in concert to bring you into balance. So work with those polarities in a positive way from the energy state that you prefer, being in balance, in a neutral state, which is actually, as we have said, always slightly positive, because a balanced state allows you to choose freely what you prefer. Therefore, you could say creation is perhaps just ever so slightly more positive than negative in its construction. So if you simply allow yourself to go back into a neutral state, the eddies and currents of the natural flow of creation, even if you then do nothing, will very, very, very slowly start pulling you in the direction of the positive cycle and give you more and more ability to decide more freely who it is you are and how it is you prefer to express your being. Always remember, when you're dealing with the negative side, that you always have the key to find the light within yourself. And always, always, always remember and remind yourself that when you're experiencing the positive side, you are always still free to choose the darkness. That way you know you are truly supported unconditionally by creation, because it's all a part of creation, and you are allowed with your free will to decide what way to express the unique aspect of creation you have been created to be. Does this make sense to you? All right. Well, now, my little angels and devils, we can, if you wish, at this time, begin the interaction of questions. Proceed however you wish. As you arrange yourselves, we will remind you that this is just the beginning of this conversation about angels and demons and these energies that we are speaking of here today. There will be more in the future after you have absorbed and truly allow yourself to understand and make your own what has already been said here today. This is just the beginning. It's just the first page of a book with many chapters. More to come.